it's not binary. There's no algorithm that says if you do X, Y, and Z, you will become a partner. It could be that you haven't done X, Y, and Z, but you're working in a field and somebody else has left or is retiring and you just managed to fill the slot. It could also be that you haven't met those things, but somebody really likes you and you have a lot of support and you get through. On the other hand, it could be that you've done everything right for many, many years and you're just getting very frustrated and they're just not making you partner.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Partnership Track. This is a podcast where we speak to partners at various law firms to find out about their career journey and any challenges that they've had and how they've overcome those challenges, and just also any advice they have for aspiring lawyers and also current lawyers. So today I have Caroline Thomas. So Caroline is a triple qualified lawyer. She's qualified in England and Wales, Hong Kong, and New York, and is also a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. She has experience of over 50 international commercial arbitrations spanning multiple sectors. She also has experience mediating commercial disputes, employment, and matrimonial law disputes. She became a partner in 2016 and now works as an independent arbitrator and mediator. Thank you for coming on the podcast, Caroline. How are you doing?
Very well. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. So I know from your experience that you've done various things over the past years. You've worked as a solicitor and a partner, and now you're working as an independent arbitrator and mediator. But before we get into that, I just wanted to start by first asking you what initially drew you to a career in law?
Well, I listened to your very excellent podcast of Brian Potts, and I was quite amused in that we actually have quite a similar background. So, Brian, I studied economics. When I was a student, I actually thought lawyers were really boring. And when I finished my first degree, which was a 4-year degree because I studied in Dublin, I actually wanted to be an economist and I got into LSE but couldn't be bothered to do the exams to do the course I actually wanted to do. So I got into a course that I wanted to do a bit less. And a friend of mine was going to law school. So I kind of followed him to law school and was told by my dad, oh, you can do it for 1 year. It's a really good way of thinking. You don't have to follow through. And dad being dad, he paid the bill for the second year without asking me, so I was stuck.
Oh,
And so I joke that I'm kind of an accidental lawyer, having
yeah.
and a failed economist, and I'm still very interested in economics. Well, earlier this week, I went to a Columbia University CPER event, and I told them I was an imposter because I have a LLM from Columbia, but I'm still very interested in politics and economics. So
Yeah.
my career was a bit messy and a bit accidental, but the funny thing is that if you talk to people, a bit like Brian, you realize that actually a lot of things in life are not quite as straight lines as one might imagine, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I really like the logic and the rigor of law, and now I'm qualified in three different jurisdictions, so it stands to reason that I don't hate it.
Yeah.
But it's not that I was somebody who knew from when they were a kid or a teenager law was exactly what I wanted to do. It wasn't like that at all.
And I think we have that similarity in the sense that I also wanted to study economics, but when I was in high school, I did economics and I really enjoyed it. But when I was applying to universities, I realized that it's actually more math based and I'm not really good at math. So I just decided that, yeah, I'm not going to focus on that. And I also had other reasons why I wanted to do law. So I just decided to focus more on law. But I think, yeah, we're similar in that aspect. So you're qualified in three jurisdictions, England and Wales, Hong Kong, and New York.
Mhm.
What motivated you to build an international legal career because I just completed the SQE and it was one of the hardest exams I've ever done. So I can't imagine doing multiple exams in different jurisdictions. But what motivated you to do that?
Um, well, I first qualified in England and Wales because I did the old route. So I did BPP and I did the PGDL and the LPC, and then I did a 2-year training contract, mainly in London, but also in Hong Kong. And so I kind of fell into being qualified in the UK. And then I got seconded for 6 months to Hong Kong. And when I qualified, I had a couple of choices. And me being me, I wanted to take some unpaid qualification leave, and that wasn't
Yeah.
possible in London. So I think at Clyde's, I went down in history as the trainee that went to Hong Kong because she wanted unpaid qualification leave. And I then, again by accident, I intended to do corporate commercial. And that was where I had signed to qualify. But then, the 2008 crisis happened and
Mm.
the team looked very different. So, having never done shipping disputes, shipping arbitration, I basically qualified into it and ended up doing a lot of court work. And
Yeah.
I took the view that the more senior I got, the more serious of a problem it would be. I mean, Hong Kong, like other jurisdictions, particularly some of the offshore jurisdictions, if you're not qualified, then it's very difficult for your clients to reclaim their legal costs. So as soon as I could, I got myself qualified and I actually took a risk and unpaid leave, paid for it myself, and was then compensated for it. In terms of study, for me, it was really, really good because I really learned the law when I had to sit, and I wasn't exempt from any of the exams in Hong Kong, so I had to sit a lot of exams.
Yeah.
And I learned from someone who knew actually a lot about maritime arbitration. So I found it really helpful to go back to studying, having worked for a bit and having some live questions in my head so that I could apply. And I think that's really interesting. Like different legal training courses in different countries work differently. And as you've mentioned, they've changed it in the UK. I think it's really useful to have had some experience of practicing law and then going back to study more. It's just, it really helps. So the German system as well, it's in two parts and you go back and you study more. I think it's really good for your learning.
Yeah. And it sounds like obviously by taking the unpaid leave, you did have to make a sacrifice to do that. Have there been any benefits in terms of your career to qualifying in multiple jurisdictions?
Yeah, so I started my career doing a lot of shipping law. And if you look, and I now teach maritime arbitration, if you look at a lot of the standard form contracts, including contracts published by an organization called BIMCO, English law is one of the major choices. In fact, in terms of choices of arbitration seat, you have Singapore, Hong Kong, and England is still very prevalent. So for shipping lawyers, being qualified in England is very important. As mentioned, being qualified in Hong Kong is essential if you do any court work. It's not so relevant for arbitration. And when I did the Hong Kong bar, I had a classmate who had studied in New York and had the New York bar, and I kind of thought, oh, I'd love to have that. And then I realized I couldn't because I'd done a conversion. And
Mm.
to get qualified in New York, you need to have studied law for 3 years. So I only
Yeah.
had 2 years. So I knew I needed to go back and get an LLM if I ever wanted to get qualified in New York. And then, ironically, before COVID, a friend of mine challenged me to go and get, and he was being facetious, a proper legal qualification, by which he meant the New York bar. And I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to apply. What the hell? See what happens. And then, as COVID started to spread in Europe, and it was fairly clear that it would go everywhere, I was being admitted to law schools in the US and even had law schools offering me scholarships. So I thought, well, this might be a sign that I should become New York qualified. Has it benefited me? I'm not sure I've done much yet with the New York bar, but I've had a couple of questions about New York law. I think one of the partners asked me about employment. And what's quite interesting is I recently got accepted for the AAA ICDR roster.
Oh,
I still need to do some things and fill in their forms, but for
yeah.
me, that's quite exciting. So sometimes I do things and then I figure out later what it's useful for. But in general, I guess my thought process was, what are widely used laws in international trade? And can I cover some of the most widely used ones? And there's obviously a line between all of them, which is, you know, English, Hong Kong, and US law are all common law, and there's a logic. Similarly, all the offshore jurisdictions tend to follow the common law, and actually getting admitted there is not that difficult. As for the New York bar, I mean, it's painful,
Mm.
but there's some very good courses like Barbary, and that's the one I use, but there's two or three, and you just sort of you meet the requirements. So you've done the 3 years of law. I needed the LLM, and then you just bite your way through and you spend 2, 3 months over the summer and you memorize it all. And lo and behold, most people pass.
Yeah, I mean, it is a lot to do, but it is definitely going to be a benefit for anyone who is looking to have an international legal career, to also look at other qualifications as well.
It's essential, I would say, and this is really important, to be qualified in the jurisdiction in which you practice, because if you're not qualified, for example, if you're based in Hong Kong and you're not a Hong Kong lawyer, you can never be a partner in a Hong Kong law firm. And
Mm.
so if you're not qualified in the jurisdiction you're practicing, your career will be stunted until you get qualified. I mean, there's some exceptions. Arbitration is more relaxed, but generally that's it. And I've seen in the past, paralegals working in various jurisdictions, and I've just said to them, you need to get qualified because otherwise you're not going to get anywhere. And most of them
Mm.
have gone and bitten the bullet and gotten qualified. Qualified somewhere, but ideally where they're working.
Yeah, that's really good advice. So, over your career, you specialized in arbitration and mediation. What sort of attracted you to that field, and why did you specialize in that area?
Um, well, shipping tends to have arbitration as dispute resolution mechanism. Not only, there's also court cases and there's ship arrest, but a lot of the standard form contracts are subject to arbitration. And as I mentioned before, often English law and seat of arbitration in London. Not always, and it's changing a bit, but generally that's it. So I ended up doing a lot of arbitration by default. Mediation is interesting. When I was a trainee, literally in my first seat, I had two supervisors, and one was a very formidable insurance and maritime lawyer, but who was also, and still is, one of the leading mediators in the UK. And for some reason, I was lucky enough that she liked me and took me to a mediation. And I remember it was an employment mediation. And I watched her mediate this dispute. It went on very late into the night, but it resolved. And she was incredible. And from that point on, I knew mediation was really interesting. And so in 2012, I took the HKIC course and qualified as a mediator, and I was grandfathered into the new system, which is called HKMAAL. But I think for me, it was too early in my career. I was too junior. I don't think people were taking me that seriously. So nothing really happened. It's only in recent years that it's been reawakening. And that's coinciding with what I think might be a renaissance in mediation. Like there's cases in the UK like Churchill, but there's also mandatory mediation in lots of jurisdictions, especially where the courts are overcrowded. And generally, I just think mediation is a fantastic way of resolving disputes and possibly also saving relationships. So I really like it, and it's something that I consciously want to work on more. The other thing is that when I did an LLM during COVID at Columbia, I took a course in advanced negotiation. I jumped straight into that one, and my professor is a leading JAMS mediator in New York. And again, he was just phenomenal and incredibly thoughtful. And it reinforced my desire to get more into mediation.
I can imagine, obviously, with the years of experience you've had, you've possibly faced certain challenges when it comes to your career in arbitration and mediation. What specific challenges did you face and how did you overcome them? Just for any aspiring lawyer who's looking to specialize in that field, are there any challenges that you face and how did you overcome those challenges?
Arbitration is incredibly tough to get into. I think in recent years, it's become incredibly competitive. And a friend of mine who's both an arbitrator and a professor said he's been warning the universities that they're churning out too many students who want to go into arbitration, and they really need to have their expectations tempered a bit because it's just there's too much supply and not enough demand.
Yeah.
And one also needs to think a little bit about niches. So I thought Brian gave some excellent advice about, not everybody applying to the major cities like New York, Washington, London, but also looking further afield. I think the same also applies in terms of looking at niches. So, for example, shipping is an interesting niche where there is demand for arbitration lawyers, although the arbitrations tend to be smaller. Employment might be a niche. In the US, a lot of arbitration is actually AAA. So it's a question of trying to work out how to position yourself so you don't line yourself up to have to compete with so many people, i.e., how do you increase your chances of success? But the
Yeah.
reality is arbitration is really interesting, and international arbitration, investor state, it's just super interesting, super political, and a lot of people are interested in it, but it's difficult. Mediation, I mean, I may be wrong, but my experience was that perhaps I got the qualification a bit early.
So for people who maybe are like, so let's say a trainee solicitor who's working at a law firm, do they get experience by just trying to work on these sorts of cases and then alongside that also doing the qualifications? Is that the way to get into that field?
Yes, so there's no harm in getting qualifications. So I'm FCIAB, and until recently, I was on the committee of the East Asia branch. And it's a great organization and it runs great programs. And it's also a very good way to network. And I think Brian made this point, but it's worth reinforcing many, many times, which is as a lawyer, you need clients
Yeah.
more even than you need technical expertise. I mean, technical expertise are kind of a given, but you need to meet people and you need to show people that you know what you're doing. So getting credentials is a good thing. Going to events on subjects that interest you is a good thing. And for sure, it doesn't hurt to become qualified as a mediator. All I'm saying is that, let's say there's parties to a divorce. Are they really going to take a student fresh from school to mediate their dispute? They might, and they might particularly do it if it's a tick box exercise and it's not that expensive. They just have to show to the court. But if they're serious about mediation, they might want to take someone who has a long-standing reputation. But I think everybody needs to start somewhere. So this is not to discourage anyone. I just think that if you jump into these things too early, then maybe you get a bit frustrated that not everything's happening quickly. And you kind of, to become an arbitrator and to become a mediator, I think you might need to show a track record. So on arbitration, what I wanted to say to you is, for me, it was, again, a bit of an accident. What happened to me is one of the institutions approached me and said, look, do you want to arbitrate this dispute? And I sort of wondered, how did that happen? And I realized in retrospect that some of the institutions have these informal lists where they're looking for, young talent, new arbitrators. And somehow, I have no idea how, I got onto that list. And so that was great, because one of the big questions on podcasts like this about arbitration tends to be, how do you get your first appointment? And actually, funnily enough, even before I got that appointment, one of my clients, who we had a big arbitration for, said, look, we have another dispute with one of our counterparties, and we just want you to tell us what the answer is, and we'll just follow your analysis. And I thought, that's quite weird. So effectively, what they were asking me to do was an expert determination. And I was very, very lucky, because the firm I was with, Holman Fennick, had an excellent conflict partner who said, yep, it's a bit strange, but we can do this. We can do a very complicated engagement letter, have both parties sign off on it, and you can do this. And so I did it. So I was really lucky in that those opportunities somehow came to me. And then afterwards, I realized, oh, I've never really thought I could be an arbitrator. And although I had listened to some seminars by Professor Reyes on how to be an arbitrator, I hadn't done the CIARB's fellowship course. So after I wrote my first awards, then I went and got the qualifications. I did it kind of the wrong way around. I mean, there's no right or wrong with these things. It's just that if you study things too early, I think the risk is that you forget because you don't use it.
And so, based on your experience in this field, I know it's really difficult to get into. For people who maybe do want to get into this field, what sorts of skills would you say are the most important, so that maybe someone who is looking into getting into this field could maybe start building those skills, so that it can then be useful for them later on? Like, what sorts of skills would you say is essential to have if you're an arbitrator or a mediator?
Well, you have to be able to write an award. So the CIARB course, the fellowship course, the final exam is always award writing. And we recently helped some applicants prepare for that. So figuring out how to write an enforceable award is really important. So you need that kind of basic building block. Now, what's interesting about arbitration is you don't even need to be a lawyer to be an arbitrator. And in fact, in shipping, many of the very well-respected arbitrators are not lawyers. And there is an active demand to actually bring in more or fresh blood. So, for example, the LMA, I believe, is looking for more non-lawyer arbitrators, because some disputes actually turn on fact, and lawyers may not, in the same way that, some lawyers are not good apparently at maths or at tech. Some arbitrators can have a completely different background and be valuable. So that's useful. And the other thing that is really important is impartiality. So there are lawyers who work in law firms who are arbitrators, but one often hears about lawyers breaking away from big firms and starting their own firms or starting their own practices as arbitrators to avoid conflicts of interest.
Thank you for that. So right now we're going to just move on to the part about partnership. You were a partner, you became a partner in 2016. And looking back at the early stages of your career, what were the key things you did as an associate that you would say helped you progress towards partnership at a law firm?
Well, I was listening to Brian Potts on this and I thought he was excellent. The truth is that you have to be a decent lawyer so that, you don't get sacked.
Yeah.
But normally it's a given, right? Because if they've
Mm.
hired you and you survive, you're probably a good lawyer. Brian made a really good comment about lawyers needing to have clients. And I think that's a fundamental thing. And I think in times of AI, working on people skills, working on building trust of clients is going to be even more fundamental for lawyers. The other thing that I didn't have, but that some people do have, is patience. So sometimes you just have to wait things out and things happen that you don't like. And if you're me, you leave.
Yeah.
But if you are someone else, you wait it out. And with the benefit of hindsight, I have noticed that staying can, with time, lead to promotion. So that's quite an interesting one. So staying power is not necessarily a bad thing. The other thing is that many firms have programs that put associates, like senior associates, on partner track, and they try and give them some guidance.
Mm.
The only thing is that once you're on a track like that, and some of them have sort of red, yellow, and greens trying to give you hints for what you should be doing, the only thing is that law firms are businesses and they're run by people. And what was interesting is when I was on a track like that, the concession was, well, look, it's not binary. There's no algorithm that says if you do X, Y, and Z, you will become a partner. It could be that you haven't done X, Y, and Z, but you're working in a field and somebody else has left or is retiring and you just managed to fill the slot. It could also be that you haven't met those things, but somebody really likes you and you have a lot of support and you get through. On the other hand, it could be that you've done everything right for many, many years and you're just getting very frustrated and they're just not making you partner. And I've seen several people like that, and eventually they just go, well, I'm going to another firm, and then they make partner there. And that's not just true for law, that's true for a lot of careers, that you might need to make a sideways move to get the promotion or to get an increase in salary. I mean, it's a bit tricky and it can be a bit political. So definitely the competency should be a given. But I think the visibility is important as well.
Yeah.
And that is not just visibility to clients, which you need the clients. And also, once you make partner, you might not have any clients. You might have to start again from scratch, depending on how it all pans out. But also visibility internally and networking internally and working with other departments and getting the support so that, normally in a partnership, there may be some kind of process, maybe a vote. So if you want those votes, then you need to have support.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for that. So you sort of alluded to this earlier on, but I just wanted to go deeper into that. You're now working as an independent arbitrator and mediator, and of course you said earlier on that being an arbitrator is really difficult or can be really difficult. But what do you enjoy the most about doing what you do now?
Well, sometimes it's very difficult. So
Yeah.
sometimes you actually scratch your head and go, oh, how do I
Yeah.
approach this? Or something's gone a bit wrong. How do I fix this? Or I've never seen this before. So sometimes it's actually not that straightforward, but I'm quite geeky and I enjoy solving things. So I enjoy the point where I'm finished and I'm pretty sure I got it right. I quite enjoy that. I enjoy seeing both sides of the argument and also having a certain amount of control over where the process is going, trying to work it out. So that is definitely something I enjoy. And I think I enjoy the interaction with parties from everywhere in the world and just starting to see how differently they present things and how differently they communicate.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I mean, you've given so much advice. Is there any other advice you have for aspiring lawyers or current lawyers, whether they want to do arbitration or mediation or just any other thing, like any advice you'd have for someone who has had the kind of experience you've had, for aspiring lawyers and also current lawyers who are early on in their legal career, do you have any advice for them?
Well, Brian mentioned mentorship and has clearly built up this great website, the Mentorship Partnership, I think it's called, which is US based, but he said that there's also European branches or European members. In any event, mentorship is something that I didn't really have when I was a junior lawyer, and well, at least not formally, and I think it's incredibly valuable. So I have had a couple of mentees, and they'll say things like, "Look, can I get a reference off you?" And I'll generally say yes. Or can I chat to you about this? And it's just fabulous. And although I've never been a participant in a formal mentorship program, I have good relations with many people I've worked with, some of whom are just incredible. And when I want advice, I know I can ask them, and they can give very quick and very sensible feedback. And they've been very generous with references in the past. So finding mentors, finding people you look up to and trust and can ask, and also who can tell you sometimes when you're wrong or doing something that they wouldn't do, it's really valuable. The other thing I wanted to say is, as you pointed out, since March, I decided I don't want for the time being to be in private practice. And, I have a company and I've now set up a website for that company as well.
Yeah.
Partnership is not the be all and end all, and the world is changing. And partnership at one law firm is not the same as partnership at another law firm. Salaried partnership is not the same as equity partnership.
Yeah.
And some partnerships, especially in Hong Kong, actually, are still unlimited liability partnerships. And that's not just true for law firms, that's also true for some accountancy firms. And the corporate governance is not always brilliant. It depends where you are. So partnership potentially brings serious responsibilities and liabilities with it. And one of the things they mentioned to us, and it was quite true during our partnership sort of training program when we were senior associates, is that sometimes you become a partner and your salary drops. And you talk to some partners and they become partner, and suddenly it's a lot harder than it was before because they're responsible for bringing in their own work. So
Yeah.
all I'm saying is partnership is traditionally the trajectory that all lawyers want to be on, but there are a lot of incredible roles outside of private practice. There's in-house counsel, but there are also non-legal roles that are incredibly interesting. So I was just remembering that one of my friends was one of the first employees of Google Europe. And I remember her giving me these bits of paper to hand out. And I think I did hand them out in Paris, desperately trying to find staff for Google Europe. And I
Wow.
remember thinking, gosh, this is an interesting fad.
Yeah.
And I was incredibly wrong. And all I'm saying is that we're in an incredibly dynamic world right now where a lot of things are changing and changing very quickly. And it's really important to ask oneself, look, what do I enjoy doing? And what do I think is interesting? And perhaps being guided by that inner voice more than sort of traditional ideas of career trajectories. The other
Yeah.
thing I wanted to say is I recently read a book called Mastery by a guy called Robert Greene, and I recommended it to a friend's son who'd been asking me a lot about career advice and internships and whatnot. And I thought that was really, really helpful. And then the other thing I wanted to reinforce, because I know you're talking to a lot of students and I know it's a really difficult economy, I wanted to reinforce the point that Brian made, which is, look, don't take rejection the wrong way. It's normal. Keep going. If that's what you want to do, keep going. Cold email people, ask them for advice. I thought it was great that you said ask for advice, do not ask for a job, because asking
Yeah.
for a job makes people feel bad because they probably can't, but they can
Yeah.
offer advice and they might be able to connect you with someone who does have a job. Keep going and don't take rejection personally. So, yeah, good luck.
Thank you so much for that. I know that the job market right now, especially for recent graduates, is really terrible. So that advice about rejection is so important. And also your advice about mentorship. And thank you for mentoring young lawyers and also for agreeing to come on this podcast as well. Thank you so much. On that note, we're going to end the podcast, but thank you so much for offering up your time to come on the podcast.
Thank you.